All right, time now for Futures in Focus. We're looking at what's happening with the VIX futures curve as voters heading to the polls now. The reflation trade, potentially a more definitive outcome starting to be priced into the market over the last 24 hours. Joining us now, Amy Wu Silverman, RBC Capital Markets Managing Director and Equity Derivatives Strategist. Amy, we've been talking about how it's the reflation and we're pricing in a solid win from someone. Is that what's happening in the market? What's your take?
Hey, Alex. Yes, absolutely. You know, I'm staring at my Bloomberg screen right now, and I see between November 4th and November 6th, those two option expiries, at least 10 volatility points separating those two, which tells me, people are continuing to place bets that we will get some sort of resolution by November 4th as opposed to November 6th, So I think that inflection had happened a couple of weeks ago and has stayed firmly that this election will have a pretty speedy decision.
If we do get that tonight, how much does vol come off? How much does the VIX sell off?
Look, I think that if we get a very clear winner tonight, that front of the term structure gets sucked in a lot. I don't know if it flattens all the way through to where the rest of the term structure is, but it comes in a lot by tomorrow. And what I think will be a little bit more interesting to see is what happens to the remaining options expiries, which, term structure has been downward sloping this entire time. And I guess what will be interesting for me to watch is whether or not investors will roll forward any plays, to obviously the impact of either a Trump or Biden victory, or if they move on to, the results of the vaccine as kind of the next thing that they're focused on.
Hey, Amy, what about the results of the Senate?
Yeah, sorry, to be clear, I think it's important that, we know both, because obviously as regards to fiscal stimulus, that is the key to watch. So really, we'll have to know not only who the president is, but also obviously, what the results from the Senate are, because, the market cares about fiscal stimulus right now. That's what they want to know, and that's why they do not want a contested and protracted election, Alex, that goes through the next couple of weeks.
Amy, as election risk potentially comes off, COVID risk could be climbing. How do the two interplay?
Yeah, look, it's a great question, and I think people are very nervous about what they hear coming, from the UK in terms of a secondary round of shutdowns, what might happen in the U.S. What I think is really different, and what I think you have to keep in mind is why this is different than April, which is we're 6 months closer to a vaccine. So, obviously none of this would be good, but even if coronavirus cases rise, if we're going to get a second round of stimulus and we see positive data coming out in December, I think those two things are overriding.
We've seen, we talk about the VIX, we've seen a lot of volatility in the equity market. Now we're seeing volatility spread elsewhere. So Treasury volatility is now at a 6-month high as well. Amy, are you noticing any migration there?
Yeah, what I thought was interesting about that was, call it a week ago, the rates market as well as the equity volatility market in terms of what they were pricing were extremely similar, to the point where the trades that we actually saw placed, Alex, in VIX were actually short VIX trades out 3 to 6 months. So essentially investors placing large bets that volatility will be much lower in the future than it is now. And we actually saw the same thing in the rates market. So essentially people betting that this rates volatility is going to come in similarly in the next 3 to 6 months.
Amy, let's talk single stocks. Where do you think we get the biggest realized volatility?
So, of course, a lot of this will depend on what happens in the next 24 to 48 hours. But one pocket that we've been looking at is solar. And one reason for that is obviously, we're trying to think about what is the most highly correlated to a potential for a blue wave. We've been looking at the ETF TAN, T-A-N, the solar ETF, as well as individual names. And you actually saw that trade kind of in lockstep with the rise of the possibilities of blue waves that's come in again. But I think you start to see, there's naturally volatility in those stocks, and I think you continue to see volatility in those stocks as people kind of think and start to segregate by sectors if there's a clear victory coming out in the next short term.